Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last session of our conference before the closing. I have to say that we were thinking of how to make you stay so long on Friday afternoon here, and the obvious solution for that would be keep something great at the end of the conference. And yeah, another reason was that we have a keynote speaker from America. So because of the time zone, this is the more comfortable time of the day than when we have morning in Europe. So these were two reasons why Sarah is the keynote speaker, which comes the last, but of course not least. We are all of us are looking forward to her experience, which she is going to share with us. Sarah has been teaching in higher education since 1994, but then she shifted mostly to online format. And that's what is important and challenging now. So she had an vast experience in teaching online, while for most of us, sudden pandemic was a big change, unexpected shift, and we had to deal with it somehow. And Sarah's speech is entitled "Communities of Integrity: Engaging Ethically Online for Teaching, Learning, and Research." So we are all curious how we can engage ethically online. Before I give the floor to Sarah, let me just remind you two more things. I know that it would be best to focus 100% on Sarah, but if you can devote 1% of your attendance to voting till the closing ceremony starts, so please go to the NI Facebook page, and there is a student photo contest. There are 3 photos waiting for your likes. So choose which one you like most and give the like to that picture. And also in SCAT, please rate the presentations you attended, so we can give the best presentation award accordingly. And now I'm not distracting anymore. So Sarah, floor is yours, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and the invitation to join you today. Please stand by one moment while I bring up my slides. You should be able to see them now. And welcome to Communities of Integrity: Engaging Ethically Online for Teaching, Learning, and Research. I'm going to begin with an acknowledgement of the land. I'm joining you virtually today from my home in Calgary, Canada, which is located on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. This includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations. It includes the people of the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. And the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. As Canadians, we take time at the beginning of ceremonies and public events to acknowledge the land and the people who have lived on it for millennia as part of meaningful ethical practice to acknowledge the history of colonialism and violence and unethical treatment of Indigenous peoples that resulted because of colonialism. Like many of us, academic integrity is about more than student conduct. It is about ethical decision-making. We begin with a territorial acknowledgement as part of our ethical practice in the ways in which we engage with the land and its people. During this conference, my friend and colleague Keita Gladji from the University of Calgary presented a session on Indigenous academic integrity. It was just a couple of hours ago. If you didn't get a chance to listen to her session live, I encourage you to watch the recording, because you may find, as I have, that when you learn with Keita, you're forever changed in your understanding of academic integrity. So even though this keynote is about creating communities in online spaces, I invite you to take a moment to reflect on the land on which you're situated and those who've been its caretakers for generations, those who've had their land taken from them, and those who have been exploited or mistreated, particularly through colonialism. These are essential considerations for those of us who dedicate our work to ethics and integrity. And speaking of ethics and integrity and those who dedicate their lives to it, I would ask you to join me, particularly in the chat, to extend our appreciation to the conference organizers who've volunteered and everyone who's volunteered to contribute to the conference. I'm sure that they know by now that doing an online event is just as much work, if not more, than a face-to-face event. I want to hear somebody giggling in the background. It's true. So thank you to everybody who made all of this event possible. And I'm reflecting as well on the conference throughout the session today. And I wanted to start with something that happened last night at the gala dinner. And Sonia said that when she found the academic integrity community, it felt like coming home. I'm paraphrasing here because I didn't write down the exact quote, but that was the sentiment. And I think it's a sentiment that many of us here share. The people in our academic community aren't just researchers or teachers or practitioners or students. We simultaneously have multiple roles and we can't separate them. Our work is a labor of love. And when you do this work, you cannot simply punch a time card or clock out at the end of the day. Integrity doesn't rest. One is not part of this community because they parachute in for a special event and then leave. That might make someone a celebrity for a day, but it doesn't make them part of a community. Being part of a community means showing up every day, day after day, doing the hard work, laughing together, crying together, and being together in community. It is our life's work. And as a qualitative researcher, I've been trained to reflect upon and declare how I'm situated within my work, including my strengths, my weaknesses, and my biases. I have an interdisciplinary background with first 2 degrees in languages and literature before coming to education. As Tomasz mentioned, I've taught in education since 1994. I spent the first 22 years of my career as what is known as a precariously employed academic. In Canada, we call them sessionals. In the United States, they call them adjuncts. Different names, different countries. But the idea is that it's a person who works without a permanent position, never knowing if they're going to have work from one semester to the next. No job security, no benefits. It was not until 2016 that I secured full-time employment in higher education. And I'd been introduced to academic integrity through a senior leader at a university who's now retired. And when I got my full-time job, I knew what I wanted to study, and it was academic integrity. I knew because it felt like coming home. But more than 2 decades prior to that, more than 2 decades, I'd often contemplated the ethical underpinnings of academia that continues to propagate systems of exclusion, hierarchy, and privilege. One result of being a precariously employed academic is that you teach a lot. You teach anywhere, someone will hire you, any college, any institute, any university. And I was never afraid of technology. So when I was offered my first opportunity to teach an internet-based course in 2005, I took it. And since then, I've taught more than 100 online courses. When I was finally hired into a full-time role in 2016, I opted to teach most of my classes online. And now I rarely teach face-to-face anymore. In the School of Education where I work, we have a large graduate program with over 900 students in blended and online programs. Since taking on my full-time role, I've now supported more than 125 master's students through their capstone projects online and used to have the privilege of supervising 9 doctoral students, all of whom now have studied online, even if they didn't start out that way. And supervising graduate students online has become part of my professional practice. Academic integrity was not an area of study that was available to me when I was a student, and I'm inspired to see so many students attending this year's conference. You'll be among the first generation of students to graduate having completed or done some of your studies during COVID-19. And whether you wanted to or not, you will have experienced emergency remote learning during a time of crisis. I use that term, emergency remote learning, deliberately, because what you have experienced is quite different from what I know to be online learning. People like me who've been teaching and learning online for years as our preferred way of engaging with one another. Prior to the pandemic, those of us who taught and learned online did so because we chose to. There's lots of reasons people opt to teach online, but this certainly has not been the case during emergency remote learning. It's been completely involuntary. People like me regularly take professional development and training workshops about how to teach and assess students online. For us, educational technology isn't about a set of tools. It includes theory, practice, and even philosophical and conceptual underpinnings. Our students also receive orientations about what to expect as an online learner. Of course, this hasn't been the case during COVID-19, when so many of you and your students, and in some cases your children, were catapulted into an online environment with little to no preparation, inadequate tools, and sometimes poor connectivity. There was almost no way for you to have an optimal experience. You had no time to prepare. And I'm guessing that your bosses and administrators never told you what to expect. And when I started teaching online, one of my bosses said to me that I could reasonably expect to put in 8 hours of preparation for every 1 hour of online coursework. I don't know if that's empirical evidence or if it was just words of wisdom, but I've remembered that number ever since. You may not have had professional elders who shared with you pearls of wisdom like that, and that teaching you that an online experience is successful when the technology is invisible. And the more visible the technology is, the less learning can happen. Of course, you know these things now. Now it's obvious, but before you started your emergency remote learning or teaching, these ideas may never have occurred to you because you didn't need to think about them. When you regularly teach online, you come to view learning management systems and synchronous tools such as Zoom as your classroom. I've had a virtual office for years, and whether it's been through different tools over the years like Skype or Blackboard Collaborate or Adobe Connect or Zoom, the platform changes. But in any case, it's a safe space and a stable space where my students and I connect. Some of you keep thinking about when you go back to your classroom, because for you, your classroom represents your safe and stable space. For me, a virtual classroom has been that way for years. So if you weren't trained to teach online, you may not have heard about frameworks such as the community of inquiry model proposed by Garrison and his colleagues more than 2 decades ago. Although it's not perfect, the model offers us a framework to understand online learning through 3 overlapping presences that make up an educational experience. The first is social presence, which has to do with humans connecting to each other in social ways. The next is cognitive presence, in creating learning that's engaging and challenging, and students want to take part in it because it's intellectually stimulating. This is tied together with teaching presence. And so that there is a teacher there to guide the experience and help students as they engage in their learning. But if all you know about online learning has happened during the pandemic, the experience you've had and your students might have been anything other than optimal. We can turn our attention away for just a moment from online learning and think about academic integrity. We know from decades of research prior to the pandemic that there's a variety of individual and contextual factors that can affect academic misconduct. And among the individual factors are a person's maturity level, with more mature students being less likely to engage in misconduct. We know that periods of peak stress can cause spikes in misconduct. If people aren't aware what's expected of them, they may make a misstep and engage in, say, for example, unintentional plagiarism, and that self-efficacy and self-regulation play a role, along with associated skills like time management. We know that contextual factors play a role, such as pressure to perform. Parents who punish children for poor grades or withhold love and affection unless the student achieves academically can drive students to misconduct in order to achieve their parents' love. A competitive learning environment, we know, can lead what's called to a cheat to compete phenomenon in which students feel they have to do whatever is necessary to succeed. And teachers who don't communicate their expectations may be accessories to misconduct when students engage in misconduct because they don't know what's expected of them. And finally, we know that when teachers care about ethical decision-making and talk to students, students are less likely to commit misconduct. But none of this is new. This is all research that has been going on for decades. These are just a few of the highlights I wanted to present to you today. But what does the research say? And this, by the way, was all research conducted in face-to-face environments. But what does the research say about academic integrity in online environments? Well, if you listen to the media, the jury of public opinion is hell-bent on telling us that there is more misconduct in online environments, but the evidence itself is quite inconclusive on this point. I've got 3 columns here that show 3 different categories of studies about academic integrity in online environments. And there have been studies that have shown more misconduct in online environments, but there are an equal number, if not more, studies of comparative studies that compare the same courses face-to-face with their online counterparts that have shown less misconduct in academic and online environments. We were just talking about this in the session prior to this with Bob and Anna. And I wanted to highlight one of these cases here because in these cases where they did a comparison of online and face-to-face courses, these were pre-pandemic. And in all of these studies, in the center column, students had a choice about which form of learning they took. So they all chose to teach or to learn online rather. And I'll also highlight the study by Kidwell and Kent of 2008. So it's quite a few years ago now. And in that study, 78% of students in face-to-face classes self-reported academic misconduct behaviors, 78%, while only 35% of their online peers reported similar behaviors. That's less than half. There is also, though, a significant age difference between the online students and the face-to-face students. In their study, the online students were an average of almost 36 years old, 35.8 years. But the students in the face-to-face classes, those who reported 78% engaging in misconduct behaviors, had an average age of just over 22 years old. So you can see that individual and contextual factors play a role in face-to-face and online environments. So in addition, there are more studies that show either that rates of misconduct among online versus face-to-face students were the same or the results were inconclusive. So we can't really draw any firm conclusions from the existing research because it's all over the map, but there are some things we can learn from this. We know that peer-reviewed studies vary greatly in quality, and we must understand what counts as quality in research. Examining aspects of research such as sample size, methodology, reliability and validity, credibility, and trustworthiness are all important. And it's important to resist the temptation to take the results of any single study as being universally applicable, but instead look to multiple studies conducted over time that are high quality. And we must also recognize that not all researchers are intellectually agnostic. Some researchers begin with the end in mind, and they know the conclusion they want to prove. In my opinion, that's not quality research, but we must be attentive to confirmation bias and other kinds of bias in research. As students, practitioners, and advocates of academic integrity, it's up to us to know about the research that has been conducted and what counts as quality in our field. So I'd like to tell you about a study that we did at the University of Calgary about academic integrity in online contexts. It was prior to the pandemic. This was a few years ago. I mentioned that I work in a school of education with over 900 graduate students who take blended and online programs. And together with some colleagues, we identified that these students were at a disadvantage compared to their campus peers because all of our academic integrity supports were face-to-face and on campus. We don't have a campus-wide academic integrity tutorial. And even though our School of Education is recognized as a worldwide leader in online learning, we had completely ignored providing any kind of academic integrity supports to almost 1,000 of our students. So this is where advocacy meets research. We applied for and we were awarded an internal teaching and learning grant to develop an academic integrity tutorial for our education-based distance learning students. The goal was to improve equity and access to distance-based online blended students. We followed in the work of Bernstein and Bass, who wanted to discover what we needed to know about the relationship between teaching and learning to make intelligent decisions about the relationship of technology to learning. So that's their quotation. I would extend that to these relationships would extend also to academic integrity. We developed our project using McKenney and Reeves' three-stage model for design-based research. We also call it DBR. We started with exploration, followed by design and development, concluding with evaluation and reflection. We started with a scan of what already existed in the university in terms of academic integrity education for on-campus students. We supplemented that with interviews from our on-campus peers. We extended our environmental scan to external universities, mostly in our own country, again, engaged with interviews with others who are working in our field, and then did an on-campus event with some of our peers. And you can see the photograph in the slide is a sticky note activity that we did with our on-campus peers, asking them what they felt would be important in such a tutorial. After doing this exploratory phase, we moved into the development and design of the project. We built the tutorial within our existing learning management system. It's a standalone, self-paced tutorial that students could take on their own time. The topics were specific to the field of education. So for example, students learned about APA citing and referencing skills. We then recruited students to take place in the tutorial and provide us feedback about their experience. So we had 987 students registered in our online and blended programs. Because of the ethics protocol that we had with our university, we cannot make research mandatory with our students. It must be voluntary. So we engaged in 7 different methods to recruit students that included announcement invitations at orientations, both online and in person, electronic newsletters for graduate students, bookmarks given out on campus, because some of our students, even though they're online, they live locally and they will still come to some events on campus. We would have faculty share information about the tutorial and the research in their classes. We had an article in the university-wide daily electronic newsletter, an invitation shared with our student government that they then shared out with their members, and then we had a webpage with information. You might think with all of these strategies that we had a lot of participation, but we didn't. We had 2.1% of students agree to take part, which was just 21 students, but we collected the data anyway. We did pre and post test surveys that included Likert scale questions and open-ended questions. Students told us that they felt they had improved their skills related to academic integrity, such as citing and referencing. They also told us that their course instructors were inconsistent in the ways in which they talked about academic integrity, with some instructors taking a lot of time to go through some details and others ignoring it entirely. They also let us know that some instructors were more approachable than others, and others made them feel intimidated. Some instructors made students feel intimidated. And interesting, students told us they wanted to talk to someone about academic integrity, and that the self-paced tutorial felt important. We realized then that we had not followed the community of inquiry model that makes for an optimal online learning experience. We had focused on cognitive aspects of the tutorial, but without any social or teaching presence. In other words, despite being a top school of education known for online learning, when it came to developing an academic integrity tutorial, we left out 2 of the 3 presences we knew would make for an optimal learning experience for our students. Our students let us know that they needed time to process the ideas and practice the skills such as citing and referencing. And they wanted to be able to talk to someone, not only about skills, but also some of the gray areas of academic integrity and ethical decision-making. Of course, that would have cost the university a lot more money to have an instructor lead that course, and they were unwilling to provide that level of resource commitment. The key takeaway for us was that a set it and forget it, or also known as a one and done approach to academic integrity education, did not work for us. Our students wanted to be part of a learning community that included their peers and their teachers. We can relate these findings to emergency remote learning during COVID-19. We know that our learning communities have been disrupted by the pandemic. We've seen increases in reports of misconduct across the globe. This was complicated by students sharing online environments that they wouldn't have done in their face-to-face environments or in their exam halls. Sharing in online environments is normal. We share photos, status updates, and files of all kinds. But sadly, what is normal behavior in online environments suddenly became misconduct in online learning environments. We've heard during various sessions during the conference that even members of our academic integrity community are trying to reconcile how sharing can be done ethically in online learning contexts. And while tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of teachers and millions of learners worldwide were scrambling to figure out emergency remote teaching and learning, predatory companies, including contract cheating companies and file sharing companies, have been capitalizing on the chaos. We must ask ourselves what has happened during the COVID-19 period that has changed how and why breaches of academic integrity may have escalated. And to do that, we can go back to those risk factors. I contend that in addition to looking at individual and contextual factors, those are the first 2 columns on the left that I had before, we can layer on an additional set of compounding and complex factors that points to shifts in our society. With regards to the individual factors, we know that students of all ages are now learning online, including those younger students who are at more risk for misconduct. They didn't have any choice in the matter. We know that in terms of stress, well, it was through the roof for everybody during the pandemic. And as students moved into emergency remote learning for the first time, they didn't know what to expect because everything was new. We also know that as students struggled with self-regulation and skills such as time management in a classroom-based environment, that likely didn't get any better in an online environment during emergency remote learning. In terms of those contextual factors, the students who were under pressure to perform before were still under pressure to achieve during the pandemic. And although some schools temporarily adapted their grading systems during COVID-19, the students themselves may have still been under their pressure from their parents to achieve no matter what. And competitive learning environments that continue during the pandemic may have worsened when instructors who weren't trained how to teach online were trying to assess ways in inappropriate ways under those conditions. And we have anecdotal evidence to show that students and instructors believed there was more cheating online, and it's possible that that became a self-actualized belief. We also know that some teachers worked hard to maintain integrity in their courses, while others just gave up because they were overwhelmed. We know as well that students' lives are inherently more complex today than they have been at any time in the past. More students have multiple and competing priorities, including jobs and family caregiving responsibilities, caring for people in their communities. This has been exacerbated through COVID-19 in ways that none of us could have expected. I expect that those of us with high tolerance levels for ambiguity and uncertainty have fared better than those who become anxious and unsettled when they don't know what to do next. All of these complex factors, I think, have been amplified by COVID-19. Of course, I put the small print there is that this needs to be validated through research, something that I'm proposing that we could look into a little bit more. We now find ourselves in a position where many schools and educational systems are contemplating continuing with some form of online or blended learning going forward. We're starting to hear more about terms such as high flex learning. People think that it's just as easy as online. But when you talk with people who've actually done high flex learning, they'll tell you again, it's not easy. It's reasonable to anticipate that multiple modes of learning that involve both face-to-face and online experiences might continue in some form, particularly as schools and governments seek ways to deal with the economic fallout of the pandemic and look for ways to save money. We can see how multiple risk factors come into play when it comes to academic misconduct. And one thing's for sure, we can see that there is little to no evidence to support the notion, the myth, that the online environment itself is responsible for increases in academic misconduct. We don't simply lose our ability to make ethical decisions because we go online, but we do know that it takes more effort to develop trust and community in online spaces. We know that creating enjoyable and high quality online experiences require technology resources, hardware, software, infrastructure. It takes time to plan for what we would like to see happen, as well as contingencies. It requires effort and uninterrupted time to concentrate, which has been a luxury for many of us during the pandemic. But it's not impossible. So take this conference, for example. The organizers have done a tremendous job creating a successful event for us all due to the time and effort, and I imagine a whole bunch of behind the scenes work that we don't even know happened. So we can turn our attention to the conference and look at what we've learned this week. This word cloud offers a visual representation of the words and ideas that have emerged during this year's conference. I generated the word cloud by collecting the titles of every session, including the pre-conferences, the keynotes, the workshops, the Petakusha sessions, and I put them all into a document, entered them into NVivo, which is a qualitative data analysis software. I told the software to exclude certain words like and the larger the word appears in the cloud, the more often it was used in the titles of the conference sessions. So of course, the words academic integrity are the most prominent, as we would expect, but I invite you to share in the chat box what other words your eyes are drawn to. The conference sessions have included a rich diversity of topics from across many disciplines, with participants attending from many countries. And I was excited for one to see the names of people on the program whom I didn't know, in addition to those whom I do. And I extend a special shout out to those of you who are presenting at your first Academic Integrity Conference. We welcome you into our community and appreciate the time and expertise that you've shared with us. But there's a caveat. In some of my previous research with a graduate student in my own country, we found that sometimes people publish one paper or present at one conference and they're never heard from again. and the reasons people don't continue with the work are unclear, but if you're a first timer or a relative newcomer, I encourage you not to view the conference as an event, but rather as a gathering of a global community of members dedicated to ethics and integrity over the long term. Our work is transdisciplinary and it spans multiple boundaries, including geographical borders and professional classifications, among other kinds of boundaries. So let's look at the transdisciplinary nature of academic integrity work for a moment. There's no universally accepted definitions of words like interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, but I draw from Lawrence's work in my understanding of transdisciplinary scholarship, which he defines as addressing complex problems from diverse and heterogeneous domains that cannot be solved by any one group working alone. We must work together across academic disciplines and even across multiple stakeholder groups that includes researchers, educators, professionals, and others. We need the cross-fertilization of knowledge and experiences from diverse groups as we draw from different methodologies and theories to develop action-oriented solutions. We transcend the boundaries of the traditions of our disciplines when we've been trained to work in, and we work with others who have been trained to work in different ways. This can be uncomfortable. I can attest to this personally because a couple of the projects that I've worked on have been transdisciplinary in nature. And I'll highlight one example. In 2020, I partnered with colleagues from our Faculty of Science to collaborate on a data mining project to help address incidences of misconduct in large STEM courses with upwards of 800 students. Our project team consisted of 5 of us from the fields of mathematics and statistics, physics and astronomy, biology, and education. This kind of collaboration was new for me. And I will tell you, there were moments when I found myself simultaneously wildly impressed and deeply intimidated, working with colleagues whose research involves collaborations with organizations such as NASA and the Canadian Space Agency. The statistical data mining and analytics techniques they used were completely foreign to me as someone trained in literary theory and qualitative research. Conversely, they felt a little lost when it came to understanding academic integrity as a field of research and scholarships. They were unfamiliar with the literature and the background of our field. Our project was conceptualized and undertaken entirely during COVID-19. We worked via email and Zoom with children and pets popping into our research meeting, an experience I'm sure that is common to all of us now. In our case, what prevented us from working together in person was not geographical borders, but public health regulations that obliged us to work from home. So as a result, even though we're all from the same university and we live in the same city, I've yet to meet 3 of the colleagues from this project. But we worked together as colleagues, creating a level playing field where any of us could ask any questions in a safe and collaborative working relationship, acknowledging and respecting that none of us had the answers, but we could do more by working together than by working alone. We quickly learned that to engage in transdisciplinary research, we needed to trust one another, acknowledge our expertise and our limitations, engage in discussions with humility, and be tolerant and compassionate. I expect our experience is not unique, and you likely have some stories of your own of working with colleagues during COVID-19. There's no doubt that COVID-19 has simultaneously put up barriers and opened new possibilities, including the opportunity to engage in transdisciplinary inquiry and to create action-oriented solutions to uphold academic integrity. These are a few of the projects that I've been working on since the pandemic started. There's the data mining one I just told you about. The other one I presented on with Jamie Carmichael, which we're looking at fake degrees and credential fraud. Jamie is an engineer and has been using her engineering skills. Same thing. I feel completely out of my depth working with an engineer, as I do when I'm working with some applied linguists who are looking at generative pre-trained Transformer 3 technology and the ways in which machine learning and artificial intelligence are affecting writing and our notions of authorship. I've been working with another colleague in engineering at my university who's doing some agent-based modeling around academic misconduct, and finally partnering with colleagues in the fields of law and criminal justice to understand what we know and what we can do about contract cheating in Canada. All of these are transdisciplinary in nature. I know because I feel uncomfortable and unsure because I'm working with colleagues who are trained in different ways from me and have different areas of expertise. We know we can't do the work by ourselves. I can't work without my colleagues on these projects, and they can't work without me. Or perhaps more accurately, we can work better when we work together. So I'll issue a challenge to you to work on projects that take you out of your comfort zone too. One of the things we can do in our academic integrity research inquiry is push the boundaries of what we know. We don't need more of the same research on the same old. But we do need to push the boundaries and understand things that will shift and change our academic integrity work. I will say that there is no place for intellectual elitism in academic integrity work. Others have pointed out that academic integrity as a field of research is less mature than other areas such as assessment. And areas of professional practice have also continued to evolve. I'm sure many of your student affairs and student services offices also went online during the pandemic. We need evidence-informed practice and practice-informed scholarship. The field has developed significantly over the past 15 years, thanks in part to the efforts of people like Tracy Pertag, whose approach was inclusive, appreciative, and generously and courageously tolerant. People like Tracy created the community of which we are now the caretakers. And as we move forward with academic integrity work, it is safe to say that online learning is here to stay. It includes teaching, learning, research, so many other ways that we connect and collaborate with each other. We've heard through different sessions in the conference that technology will continue to advance, and in doing so, challenge us to think about the intersection between ethics, integrity, and education. If you didn't attend the sessions that address topics such as machine learning or artificial intelligence or surveillance technologies, I encourage you to watch the recordings if they're available, because these are emerging areas that urgently demand our attention, as they will bring increasing levels of complexity to our work in the coming years. And I hope by now you're convinced that we must disrupt and challenge the traditional notions of academic integrity as being solely matters related to student conduct. Academic integrity and ethics extend to teaching, learning, research, graduate supervision, administration, leadership, and every aspect of education and science, including decolonization. We cannot have an ethical future if we don't attempt to right the wrongs of an unethical past. We, the academic integrity community, will continue to lead this work into the future. And we have a big responsibility to ensure that ethics and integrity are top of mind, not only today, but for generations to come. None of us can do this work alone. We'll continue to see more collaborations across countries, sectors, disciplines. This brings us both opportunities and challenges. We know that our work is generally underfunded and under-resourced, but there are still some with better access to resources, funding, and support to do this work than others. We can do better by doing together. And so I'll conclude with a call to action. The first is engage. This is our community. It's up to us to be its stewards and caretakers. We cannot sincerely care about integrity if we don't care about one another. Creating community means showing up in regular ways whenever we can, cultivating those relationships over time, and seeking opportunities not only to work with one another, but to care about one another. The second one here, extend. COVID-19 has taught us that we can leverage technology to our advantage. Of course, we look forward to a time when we can meet together in person, but we know by now that it is not a case of online or in person, but rather online and in person. We can continue to use technology to our advantage to connect, collaborate, and to care about one another. If you have not already done so, I challenge you to use technology to reach out and connect with at least one new person from the conference. Use email, Twitter, LinkedIn, any social platform you feel comfortable using, and reach out to someone new. Reach out to a presenter to let them know what you learned from their session. Reach out to a colleague to set up a virtual tea or coffee. Send an email of appreciation to the conference organizers to tell them how much you appreciate the work you put into the conference. And by extending technology and using it to our advantage, we can extend our reach beyond our borders. Remember that when technology becomes invisible, the connections, both human and technological, are the strongest. I was thinking the other day about a particular academic integrity colleague, trying to remember at which conference I last saw the person. And I finally figured out I've never seen him in real life. But we've come to get to know each other so well using technology that we are genuinely connected. And I have every confidence that there will be many of us who when we see one another for the first time, we won't be meeting each other. We will be greeting each other as old friends. And finally, empower. Create opportunities for others. This includes those who are junior in their career as well as students. We know that in a global community, some of our colleagues may be working in difficult economic, social, and political conditions. It is important to extend invitations to those who work in developing countries and those who may have had less opportunity to develop their careers despite their best intentions. As a community of educational ethicists and academic integrity activists and advocates, we must be attentive to diversity, equity, and inclusion in our work. And in doing so, we will continue to ensure that our community is sustainable into the future. And so I close with a thank you to you, my friends. You are part of my academic integrity community, and I am part of yours. Inai has brought us together through this beautiful conference, and I look forward to a time when I can connect with you all again next, in person and online.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I don't want to say thank you. It was a lot of effort, of course, organizing this conference. And a couple of weeks ago, I regretted the decision that we decided to organize it. But my colleagues then, it was I can name her. It was Veronica who pointed out that this conference is something which is keeping the community together now when we can't meet in person, and that's really true. We had the opportunity to meet here, to exchange the ideas, to get the inspiration from others. And that's exactly the purpose of such gatherings and the purpose of the existence of NI. Are there any questions? I can't see any questions in the Q&A feature. There are a lot of messages in chat, but I can't see any particular question. If anyone can, so please repeat it. Or Sonia, if you can see any question.
It's just so many grateful people. Thank you so much for this amazing keynote. What a way to end the conference.
I can say, Sonia, you inspired me last night when we were at the gala dinner and you talked about the notion of coming home. And I thought, yes, that is exactly the sentiment. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about this community. It feels like coming home.
Thank you so much. You are so inspirational, beyond words, really. Thank you so much.
This is something which should be said at the closing. So yeah, that's a pity that we don't have the real conference, because then the closing ceremony would be immediately after that keynote. But unfortunately, we have to move to another room because this webinar session is really restrictive for participants, and we want the closing ceremony to be in a meeting where all of the people can be seen and can send the messages and talk. I know that Sarah, you are also running the network in Canada. So maybe you can. We still have 1 minute. You may invite people to your conference, or I don't know if it is particularly your, but there is a Canadian symposium coming soon.
Yes, I should give a shout out to I call him my academic integrity brother, Todd Denham from Thompson Rivers University, fellow Canadian. He's heading up the Canadian Symposium on Academic Integrity. I don't know if Todd's here, if he can let us know if they're still accepting registrations entirely online and entirely free. Speaking of gratitude, the Thompson Rivers University is sponsoring the entire event. And I'll see if I can find a link, if maybe somebody else can find it and pop it into the chat for folks. It's the Canadian Symposium on Academic Integrity through Thompson Rivers University. And I think they have, they also, thank you. And they'll have presentations not only from Canadians, but I know as well that some NI members will be presenting there as well, which is a true honor and privilege for us to learn from and with colleagues from other parts of the world. So yes, we invite you to join us after, of course, the NI summer school next week. Like June is like big integrity month now. After the NI summer school, then the Canadian Symposium. Yes, and it will be time for you to stay up late.
Yeah, better stay up late than than waking up earlier, or at least for me. So, conferences in America are quite fine. Yeah, and the NI summer school will be also an opportunity for a gathering of people, of researchers, and mostly PhD students who are interested in the topic of academic integrity. We were really surprised how wide audience we got. We have over 40 people from all around the world, so I'm sure that the summer school will be the great event.
I think it's just so inspiring to see so many opportunities for students to do this work and engage with this work. I honestly, this summer school is the first of its kind, I think, anywhere in the world. So shout out to, Salim and Zenith and everybody who's on the organizing committee for that, because truly it's going to be setting a new standard and a new level for engaging with students who are going to be carrying forward our community. So I think it's absolutely brilliant, that summer school.
Okay, thanks on behalf of the organizing committee. I'm not organizing that. I'm just delivering one workshop, and that's what I could promise. Nothing more. Okay, yeah. NI is a platform for inspiration. It makes the life of those who do research or who are active in the area of academic integrity. It makes our life easier. But yeah, it's still a lot of work and still a lot of effort, which is required from all of us, because building culture of academic integrity is difficult, and sometimes you have the support from the management at your institution, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have you are in touch with the people in your country who feel it the same. Sometimes you don't, but it is always good to have a place where you can exchange ideas and learn from what work elsewhere. So I don't see any questions in chat. So thank you, Sarah, for very nice keynote speech. Thanks all of you for coming. Thanks, Leon, for interpreting not only Sarah's keynote, but all the other keynotes and panels. And we have now 12 minutes, and in 12 minutes we meet in Pippi Langstrom room to sum up everything, to re-announce the NI awards, to announce the Best Presentation Award, the winner of the student photo contest, and Sonia is going to announce the European Academic Integrity Week. So thanks again, and see you in 12 minutes.